the sad truth of it is like your intestines hanging out,
Yeah.
not the biggest concern, to be honest. That's not the biggest thing that you labeled in the list of injuries you just have. Like,
The rope is free!
what?
The rope is free!
Ah, shit!
Liam's fallen into a crevasse, and I immediately thought he was dead, or at least seriously hurt.
And my guts had been ripped out of my body and were being contained by my flight suit.
I know a mountain lion is on top of me. All right, welcome to episode 2 of the WILDERTAINMENT podcast. I am your host, Vince, a former helicopter rescue swimmer in the Coast Guard and an aviation survival technician. Welcome to the show where we tell entertaining wilderness adventure stories. Now, I'm going to level with you. Today's not what I could describe as a entertaining story per se. I would say this is more of a horrific story. Nevertheless, a phenomenal story told by an incredible human being. Now, I'm seriously not being cute here. This is quite gruesome. It's honestly very gory. So if you're young, parental supervision, I would say, is certainly advised. And if you're, light in the stomach, then, buckle up because it's a great episode. And I'm incredibly honored to be able to share this story, but it's a rough one to hear. So this is a story that we have heard about in the Coast Guard quite a bit if you're within that community. And we're quite lucky to have this person on today. So thank you to Ashley Leopard, who was on the Rescue Swimmer Mindset podcast and put us in touch with this great story. So this is the story of a woman who crashed in a helicopter, which then proceeded to tumble down the face of a mountain. If you're interested in stepping it up a notch and seeing the visuals associated with this podcast, those will be within the show notes of the podcast. And we have the entire podcast up on YouTube. So just look up Wildertainment on YouTube. That's wilderness, like wilder to the first part of the word wilderness, Wildertainment as an entertainment on YouTube. And then you can follow along with this phenomenal story. So without further ado, our guest, Gina Panuzzi. Gina Panuzzi, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. How did we get in touch? Was that through Ashley Leopard?
Yes, Ashley is the one that basically said, hey, would you be interested in doing another podcast? And I was like, yeah, let's do it.
For all those of you guys that have not listened to the previous podcast with Ashley Leopard, she was a flight mechanic and aviation electrical technician second class, which I believe you were as well, right, Gina?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So did you know Ashley?
I didn't. We basically kind of just passed each other, I guess. By the time that I had my accident in 2010, she was kind of, off doing her own thing. So yeah, we just kind of barely missed each other. That's
cool. Yeah. And yeah. I already sense kind of a similar personality from both of you guys. Ashley's definitely a colorful person.
Right.
And right off the bat, when we set this up, I could sense that from you. So I'm excited to have you on. You have a phenomenal story. I was actually just talking to my partner of Rescue Swimmer Mindset about your story, and he didn't know. He knew I had somebody that we were going to discuss a big helicopter crash, but he didn't know it was your helicopter crash because he was like, "Oh my God, it's that crash! That was big news! This is a great podcast." So great to have you on. Let's talk let's build it up a little bit.
Okay.
So when did this start?
This started early in 2010. We had been deployed to Whidbey Island, Washington, to cover security ops for the Winter Olympics that were in Vancouver, Canada.
Right on. So you're serving in the United States Coast Guard, but you're
Correct.
Covering the Canadian Olympics. How does that work and why?
It was. I mean, the Winter Olympics. We were chosen to do security for that because we had a lot of different representatives from other countries. There was talk of President Obama and Vice President Biden making an appearance. So there was just quite a lot of kind of big names that were supposed to roll through. And of course, we have a great security team, the MSRT team at that time. And so they basically asked us if we would do it. And we were like, yeah, let's do it.
So what's your job specifically as a Coast Guard flight mechanic surveilling over the Winter Olympics in 2010?
So technically the MSRT, we were we were basically running ground crew for the MSRT. And what that meant was basically making sure that the planes were ready to go at a moment's notice, that they were gassed, fueled, electronics were running great, rescue systems were working great, plotting out points of escape in case something did happen at the Olympics and we needed to kind of get in there and get out. So a lot of just technical plotting and a lot of security, just running a lot of security routes in and out. So
it's kind of like terrorism prevention in a sense. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. And I remember hearing some stories about, like, not to get too into the nitty gritty of like the Coast Guard's anti-terrorism tactics, but I remember I know that there's a helicopter in the Coast Guard that flies over Washington. And I believe if anybody comes like within the airspace, they have like a sign in the back window and it's like, back off. This is government like land. You're like infringing on our property. Like it's pretty funny.
Yeah, they're pretty awesome. Yeah, they're and the helos that we were running for those tactical points. I mean, they're outfitted with armor for, if we were to get shot at, things like that. So they're very much so specifically for those kind of tactical missions. So
interesting. So it's not the regular Coast Guard Jayhawk that you're flying in?
It can be outfitted with all the rescue equipment, but they do have the special, bulletproof boards that kind of run on the underside. They're outfitted with the 50 cal mounts, things like that. So they are a little bit more, set up for tactical missions, things that, require the MSRT and gunners involved. So, yeah.
Interesting. I'll keep that in mind when we talk about the crash, as far as like maybe it's reinforced, but let's save that a little bit. So you started your Coast Guard career in 2004.
Correct.
And now we're in 2010. We're in Canada. You've served your tour, if you will, at the Winter Olympics in 2010. So now you're on your way back from Whistler area, right?
We were supposed to do a 3-leg trip. We were basically staged at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, which is right on the border of Washington and Canada. And so it gave us a great place to kind of stage, set up, and then right over the border is where we would run our routes and things like that. So we were going to do a 3-leg trip. It consisted of going from Whidbey Island, Washington to Salt Lake City to Kansas City, and then Kansas City to Richmond, Virginia, which I was stationed in Air Station Elizabeth City at that time. So Richmond, Virginia is fairly close. But I don't know if you know this, but air crew can only fly for 8 hours before they're bagged out. And so you have to break up trips into small amounts of time so that you don't bag your crew out.
Gotcha. So you're flying from Whidbey Island, you're saying? And now where's your next pit stop?
So we are flying from Whidbey Island, Washington to Salt Lake City, Utah. And that's where we are going to spend the night, kind of get everything taken care of, get offloaded, spend the night, get some rest, eat, fuel up for the next flight so that by the time the morning comes, we're ready to rock and roll and get on the road. Gotcha.
And where was it? So now you're in Salt Lake, and now where's your next pit stop supposed to be?
So that morning that we woke up, the plan was originally to fly from Salt Lake City to Kansas City. And so everything, we had tied the blades down. There was a wind advisory the night before. And we were told, and obviously you can see it when you wake up in the morning, we had a ramp time of 7:30. And so we were supposed to be out of there between 8 and 8:30. And by the time that we got to the airport, the weather was just really bad. The radar guys at the airport were canceling flights, delaying flights, because there was a huge storm rolling in through the mountain range. And so we basically kind of got to the airport that morning knowing that we were going to be delayed, if not canceled. And so when we did arrive, the air crew basically goes into doing what we normally do, which is fueling up the plane, tying down all of the luggage, making sure that everything is secure, getting the blades back in working order, doing pre-flight checks, things like that. And so we started to do all of our normal jobs. And we had 2 planes there at the Olympics. So we had the 6028, which is the plane that I was on, and we had the 6040. And so we had 2 different crews, and the crews are basically getting the aircraft ready to deploy. And then the pilots, we had a pilot and co-pilot, so 2 sets in each plane, and they are basically going up to talk to the weather guys just to see what we're looking at as far as the storm, if we need to delay, things like that. So essentially, we're just getting ready to get on the road, and the pilots come back and kind of give us the breakdown and say, all right, this is what we're looking at. And because we've been deployed close to 2 months. I mean, we'd been there for quite some time. I know that people were anxious to get back. The pilots had families, wives, kids that they hadn't seen in 2 months. And it was a long deployment, fun, but definitely long. So I think people were just anxious to get home. And the decision at that time was, because we were in a helicopter, that we could possibly fly around, under, kind of, maneuver around the bad weather and get on our way. And so that decision was made. I know that there was some crew resource management issues that we faced. And I think some of us agreed that perhaps we could fly around it or under it, but maybe we should wait it out a little bit. And the main decision was made that we were going to get on the road. And so we did.
How did you feel about getting on the road, if you will?
I had an issue with it. For anybody that's flown in a helicopter, obviously this was my career. It wasn't the first time, I've been flying in helicopters for quite some time. And obviously the Coast Guard flies straight into hurricanes and things like that. We fly when no one else will. I wanted to wait. I didn't see the harm in waiting, but the decision was made, minority or majority rules, and we ended up getting on the road.
Interesting. Okay. So you're leaving Salt Lake City now. The decision has been made.
Decision's been made.
All right. So Salt Lake City, I've been there. As a rock climber myself, I know the mountain range that you have to fly through if you're flying, anywhere in the eastern direction. So you decide to lift off. Let's get into it. What happens?
So we get airbound. It's beautiful. Obviously the weather that's coming in is coming in over the mountain range. And so we probably had about 25 minutes just flying through Salt Lake City, which is a lot of salt flats. It's beautiful. I mean, Salt Lake City, anybody that's been there, it's beautiful terrain. It's beautiful. And of course it's early morning. The fog is kind of resting on the ground. I got some really great pictures. It just was a gorgeous, crisp morning in March. And obviously we're approaching the mountain range. And I remember taking some pictures of, the storm that was rolling in. And we're about 45 minutes in flight when we start to kind of hit some trouble. And essentially what had happened was the pilot's door, the latch wasn't closing all the way, so his door was kind of popping open in flight, which isn't a huge deal. It's more of an annoyance than anything. I know it sounds scary having your door pop open, but it's just the little latch wasn't catching all the way. And so essentially when we got to the mountain range, we pulled into a hover, and the pilot was kind of, fiddling with his door, trying to get that fixed, while the 6040 just kept going. They just kept trucking right on along. So we pulled into a hover. There was another plane that was showing up on our radar, but he wasn't giving us his location or anything like that. So I know that the co-pilot at that time was trying to hail him, trying to get his coordinates so that we didn't have a midair collision while the pilot was addressing his door handle. And so we were kind of just pulled into a hover at that point, and yeah.
So you have one pilot, the person controlling the cyclic and the collective, right? Like the person controlling the helicopter, he's fiddling with his door.
No, the co-pilot, they were
co-pilot.
both kind of sharing the jobs. We had, obviously the co-pilot was trying to hail, this other plane that was in our area. And then, I would say that the co-pilot was doing majority of the flying at that time because the pilot's attention was at his door.
Gotcha. Okay. So definitely the co-pilot over here is kind of multitasking in this lesser than perfect flying conditions.
Right. Which any pilot, and especially a dual pilot system, you're always going to have to be multitasking. So this isn't new. This isn't something that, oh my gosh, he's talking and one guy's fixing his door. It's about being really aware of your surroundings, as well as kind of keeping the plane in the air and doing little tasks along the way. So multitasking isn't what got us killed, or what had us potentially be in danger. So the pilots were prior service, both of them experienced to the hilt. So it just was kind of a combination of, just little events that kind of came together and got us into that position. But both of them were doing a great job of kind of their individual tasks. So
that's right, because they're both very seasoned pilots, right? And you just mentioned prior service. What did they do?
I believe they were both prior Army combat pilots.
Wow.
So yeah, they had seen the worst of it. And they were both MSRT pilots. So they weren't just search and rescue. They were used to the kind of tactical aspect of what the MSRT entailed.
Got it. But
yeah.
were they accustomed to flying in a mountainous range in the winters in the conditions
right.
of Utah?
And that's kind of where things got hairy. Yeah.
How do they get hairy, Gina? How do they get hairy?
So, essentially, as you know, helicopters are kind of an interesting thing to keep in the air. I think most people kind of look at it as, that's an anomaly. It requires a lot of lift, obviously airspeed, lift, forward direction, all these things kind of come into play. And anyone who spent any time in the mountains knows that the air is a little bit thinner. And that's essentially kind of what got us into trouble. Essentially, we were pulled into a hover in the mountain range. A storm is we're in the beginning, it's rolling through us at this time. We've got a pilot that's focused on fixing his door. We've got a co-pilot that's trying to hail another aircraft, and the altitude alarm goes off. Now, altitude is obviously very important because, as you know, the air gets thinner, and keeping this machine basically in the air requires a lot of lift, forward movement. It's basically beating the air into submission just to keep us in the air. And the air was a little bit thinner. And and being on the East Coast, we definitely aren't flying in a lot of mountain ranges. And so this was obviously one of those kind of training moments that, yes, you do train for these, but it's not something that you do on a regular basis. So I think that just the combination of where we were, the air being thinner, not having the qualifications of being used to flying in this type of weather definitely kind of got us into trouble. And so the first altitude alarm goes off. It's acknowledged by both pilot and co-pilot, and they kind of both go back to doing their own things. And I'd say probably within a minute and a half, the next altitude alarm goes off. And essentially what we're hearing in the back, so there's 3 of us in the back and then 2 pilots up front. We've got a rescue swimmer, a flight mech, and then myself. So in the back of the helo, there's two seats that are bolted to the deck. And essentially they're supposed to withstand 10 G's worth of force. So they're bolted to the deck. Both air crew positions back there have the 5-point harnesses. It's a very sturdy place to be. It's where you want to be if anything goes wrong. So myself, I'm off kind of to the flight mech's right, and I'm sitting in just a nylon troop seat. It's basically just 2 pieces of nylon, 2 little steel rods, and then just a little lap belt with some D-rings connecting it to the rods behind me. So we've got all of our luggage basically piled in front of me. And because I'm so tall, I'm 6'1", and so I didn't have the leg room because all of our luggage and everything is kind of in the middle of the deck and it's all tied down. So I basically kind of threw my legs over the top of the luggage and was just kind of lounging in my seat. And so the rescue swimmer is in the BA chair. He's running the radios. We've got the flight mech they're both in their 5-point harness seats. And then you've got me kind of just off to the side lounging around. And we had planned on when we stopped to fuel up, we were all going to kind of shift position so that everybody had a chance to sit in the comfy seats. So that's kind of our positioning in the back. Now, the rescue swimmer can see the altitude because he's got, the little comms console sitting right there.
Right.
And I'm seeing him, and he's kind of keeping an eye on it because the alarms that are going off they're ringing in our ears. So we're all connected to the same comm systems. And so the altitude alarms that the pilot and the co-pilot are hearing, we in the back, the crew is hearing as well. And so it gets acknowledged, both pilot and co-pilot acknowledge that the altitude alarms are going off. And essentially what's sending the altitude alarms off is that the helicopter is losing altitude. And what that means is it's taking more power to keep us airbound. And so you want to be able to gain altitude so that you can have that lift to basically keep the helo in the air. And so the second altitude alarm goes off. We're all kind of looking at each other in the back. The pilots acknowledge it, go about their business. And now in order for them to acknowledge it, there's buttons that need to be pushed to turn the alarm off. So buttons were pushed, it was turned off. I see out of the corner of my eye the rescue swimmer who's watching the console, who can see our altitude, kind of looking a little, okay, we're kind of getting into the danger zone. But obviously you have to put that trust in the pilots because they're the ones that are flying the plane.
Well, not just that, but you mentioned that the rescue swimmer was, so like myself and my partner Cody, we were both rescue swimmers, right? And you mentioned that this rescue swimmer was brand new, fresh out of A school, right?
He had probably been about, I want to say probably about a year. He'd been a rescue swimmer for about a year.
Got
Just
it. So
a baby. He's
so
fresh.
yeah. All right. So you got a baby
Just a
rescue
baby.
swimmer,
Right.
but not just that. He's flying as you said a BA, which is a basic air crewman. That's
Right.
not the main duty of a rescue swimmer, though they're
No.
more than qualified to do it, and we're trained to do it, but we don't practice it on a regular
Right.
basis typically.
Right.
So first of all, you have the fact that this is a new rescue swimmer. You
Right.
have the fact that he's doing a duty that he's not really, that's not his main job. And, you know, he's in a position where maybe he, you know, doesn't feel like it's his place to bring this up to these two well-seasoned Army prior
Right.
service pilots, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's not something we would normally bring up, like, hey, can you guys pay attention to the altitude? You know, there's obviously, it's military decorum, and as much as you do have a relationship with your flight crew, it's not something that you want to be like, hey, can y'all do your job up there and maybe pay a little bit more attention? You know what I mean? There's really not a tactful way to correct a pilot or an officer and say, could you guys pay a little bit more attention to this? You know what I mean? And you obviously being prior aircrew know that you got to be a little tactful when it comes to things like that. And I guess we just have trust in the pilots and they're acknowledging the fact that these alarms are going off and they know what they're doing and know what needs to be done to correct it.
Well, I've definitely like experienced multiple different types of air crewmen, and like it's
Right.
kind of fun because personally, I would probably be one of those timid because I wasn't in that long, and basic
Right.
air crewman was not a position I would fly that often. But yeah, I would probably be in a similar situation where I would feel slightly uncomfortable bringing this up. But I also know specific like basic air crewmen that would just be like, "Hey, check the
Right.
altitude." Like, which is like, you know, they address like the efficiency of being loud, slightly obnoxious, and getting that attention in an important moment. And I can respect those people.
I mean, they're hearing the same alarms that we are. They're the ones that have to turn them off. So you've got to know, like, if the aircraft is telling you this is a huge concern, this is a huge concern.
Yeah.
So, you know, you kind of feel like, okay, they're hearing the same alarms that we are. They're the only ones that can correct it. So they're acknowledging it. They're turning it off. And maybe they did give us like a slight little boost to kind of, you know, okay, so I'll give us a little bit more altitude. But it's easy in that type of environment to really kind of lose altitude very quickly. And that's essentially what was going on. So
could you see your surroundings outside of the helicopter? Where are you relative to the mountain range?
No, because basically cloud cover had rolled in. The storm is starting to kind of engulf us where we were prior flying on the outskirts of it. Now we've been in a hover long enough to where it's basically moved in. So there's no visual. And at that point, I know that we possibly switched from visual reference to just instruments only. So hence another reason why that altitude alarm was so important. Right. Because we just didn't have the visual reference that we normally would.
Then what happens?
So probably I would say about 45 seconds pass, and then the third altitude alarm goes off. And within 8 seconds of it being acknowledged, the body all of a sudden just outspun the rotors and we impacted the mountain and we're tumbling down. Now in this moment, what's going through my head, because I'm just lap belt. I have no shoulder harness, and the equipment that I'm in, I have long johns on. I have my flight suit. I've got my leather aircraft jacket, and I've got the flight vest that we fly in. So that's pretty much the only equipment that all of us are wearing, except the two crewmen in the back and then the two pilots up front are in the 5-point harnesses and the seats that can withstand 10 Gs. And I myself am just in a little temporary fold-down troop seat, no protection whatsoever. And so at this point, we've impacted the mountain, which is jarring, and you're in a free fall. So I feel my body lifting out of my seat, and the only thing that's keeping me contained is the fact that my seatbelt, my lap belt is keeping me down. But I feel that I'm up off my seat. My arms are obviously going up. And at that point, you know you're going to impact. You just don't know when. And as you know, training, everything kind of kicks in. I knew that my feet were up up on all of our luggage, and I needed to get in a seated position to where I could basically kind of just maintain that as much, control over where I was and what was going to happen to me as possible. So you start running through these checklists, and I'm trying to move my legs as we're tumbling down the mountain. I'm trying to get myself in a more controlled seated position, which the guys, they're already there. I mean, everybody's basically kind of just bracing for impact at that point. So and this is all happening in slow motion. So at this point, we've already impacted the mountain. The body is out
hold on.
rotor.
The first thing that happens, did you say like the tail hits? That's what you feel? Like the tail of the helo?
Yes. So the tail hits the mountain, and all of a sudden the body it's spinning out of control. And now, so everything that was keeping the rotor spinning and the body we've lost that tail. And so now the body, instead of the rotors, the body is spinning, the body of the helo is spinning. So we've impacted, we're spinning, and we're falling down the mountainside. And at this point, I have a small window that's kind of, directly across from me. And I can hear the carbon fiber blade tips hitting the trees. And I'm seeing trees rushing against the window that's directly in front of me. And I mean, we're getting bounced around, we're spinning. I can hear blade tips just crashing off. I mean, it was so loud and so violent. You're just getting jerked in every direction. And that final impact is coming. And you're in the middle of a crash, and it's what every aircrew fears. I mean, it's what we train for, but it's our biggest fear, because everyone knows that the rate of survival in a helicopter crash is very low. It just doesn't happen. And you're in the midst of this moment. You're very aware what's coming, and all you can do is just pray to God that everyone survives that impact.
I think I changed my mind. I don't want to do this survival-based podcast anymore. It's just not for me. I'm sorry. It's been a great episode so far.
Right.
We'll fun. Edit Thank this, you. But I'm retired. Right? That's brutal. That's really brutal. So,
yeah.
I don't know, and I apologize because oftentimes my references are based around movies, but when you're describing this tumble down a mountain, I'm picturing.
The tail is broken off. We've lost the blade tips. I mean, it's just the trees are crashing through the windows. It's the most violent. It's so violent. I can't even, things are flying off the deck as well as we tied everything down. I mean, we're like a pinball just getting bashed against everything as we're rolling, and we're gaining momentum as we're coming closer to the ground.
And you can feel this momentum building?
Yes. You can feel it. And we're all very aware of what's going on. And this is all happening within 8 seconds. You know what I mean? It's 8 seconds from us being airbound to us hitting a mountain and flying down to the bottom of this snowy ravine. We're hitting the mountainside, we're hitting cliffs, we're hitting trees. We're just getting, it's just the most herky-jerky, violent, and it's crazy. And then comes the impact. So the impact, normally the Coast Guard, we prepare for water landings. Majority of what we do is over water. So, anytime we have to crash on land, it's just kind of unprecedented. It's not something that we train for, but majority of what we train for is water landings. And so, knowing that we're about to impact on land, you know what's coming, and it's going to be bad. And I remember the impact of it was so hard. It knocked us all unconscious. We ended up impacting at 22 Gs. So I don't know if you're familiar with G-forces, but the space shuttle launches at 4 Gs. So 5 times the force of what the space shuttle launches at, plus 2 is how hard we hit. It knocked us all unconscious. It was so violent. And I remember, so we're all unconscious at this moment. We've just impacted. It's the hardest, most violent hit that I could ever describe. And I remember kind of coming to, and the first thing that I remember doing was reaching up to my mouth, because I remember before I went unconscious, my jaw slapping against my teeth closed. And thank God that I didn't bite my own tongue off, because I remember just the first thing that I did becoming more conscious was reach up to feel if my mouth was still there, because that's what I remember right before I went unconscious was that hard hit that just, it was mind blowing. And
let's rewind a second. Yeah, I got way too many questions already.
Okay.
So you said it was a short crash. But you also said it's 8 seconds. 8 seconds is not a short crash. That's like
right.
And you mentioned it slows down. Of course, it slows down, right? And that 8 seconds is just a marathon of a crash. And I'm very surprised that you, like, and the crew are still conscious while you're tumbling down this mountain. So you're tumbling for 8 seconds long, and I'm very surprised that you didn't become unconscious upon the initial like collision with the ground.
That's what took us all out. We were all unconscious. The only time that we all lost consciousness was that initial when we impacted the final impact, which was tumbling down the mountain, and then we hit the bottom, and that took us all out.
But you were conscious when the helo first touched deck.
Right. I did. And we'll get to that when it comes to the injuries. We'll talk about all that fun stuff because yes, that was, the injuries that took place were pretty intensive.
I'm sweating. So, all right. So you tumbled down, you were unconscious. How long do you think you were unconscious for?
I want to say a couple minutes, 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
2 minutes about. And I remember kind of coming to. So obviously I spoke before of the ICS. We're all connected to the internal comm system. And the first thing that I remember, obviously reaching up to feel my mouth and my face shield, we had helmets with the face shield, and the face shield was down. That was completely shattered and had embedded into my face. And I remember just feeling for my teeth. And I can hear in my ear, I'm hearing people start to kind of come to, and I hear the pilot saying, "Is everybody okay?" So first of all, I'm hearing voices in my ear, which is obviously a relief because we just had this humongous crash. There's 5 of us. I want to make sure that there's still 5 of us. So I'm buried. Everything that was tied down in the deck and the flight mech seat. So the flight mech seat, the bolts completely sheared off of both the flight mech and the rescue swimmer seat. So they completely had sheared, and the rescue swimmer had kind of gone out the window that sits above the comm center. So he had kind of projected out the window, and the flight mech, his seat had completely sheared, and he was laying on top of all of the luggage that was landing on top of me. So I have ammo cans, Pelican cases, suitcases, a 50 cal laying all on top of my body, as well as a person in a seat that's completely sheared from the deck, and he's laying on top of me. He's struggling to kind of get himself up and out, and I'm trying to first of all, the first thing that I really noticed, besides obviously feeling for my jaw and feeling that my face shield has embedded itself into my skin, I'm having a really hard time breathing. And I remember when the pilot was saying, "Hey, is everybody okay? Talk to me. What's going on?" I remember panting and not being able to breathe very good. And I remember telling him, "I think I cracked some ribs and I think I punctured a lung," because I just I couldn't get any more than just, I couldn't get a deep breath. And anybody that's ever been in that position to where you can't breathe, you kind of panic a little bit. You kind of try to adjust because all you want to do is get a deep breath. And I couldn't. It was just all shallow breathing. So I remember saying that into the ICS, saying, "I'm okay, but I think I've punctured a lung." And so I'm hearing voices come alive, and I'm feeling Darren, who was the flight mech, I'm feeling him kind of shifting, and he's trying to get out of his seat. I'm seeing across the way a little bit, Ed was the flight mech, Darren was the swimmer. I'm seeing Darren kind of start to kind of move. Now, the way that we landed, the fuselage, the tail was completely disconnected from the fuselage. I'm looking to my right, and I see outside. I see snow inside. I see trees. I mean, we're halfway in, halfway out. The snow, the trees, everything is coming to the cabin. So we're landing. We're completely laid on our side, and I'm basically strapped into my seat, and I'm laying on my back looking up towards the main egress door. So we've completely been on our side. The front of the helo, the window has completely, it's been kicked in the day the dash actually caved in on the pilot and the co-pilot. The co-pilot was able to get out of the helo. The pilot had a compound fracture in his femur, and the dash had caved in on him, and he was pinned. So he couldn't get out. But so far, all of us are alive. Praise God. We survived this initial crash. Everybody's trying to talk. And I remember the co-pilot was in just a state of shock, or the aircraft commander, the pilot was in a state of shock. The co-pilot was stuck because the dash had caved in on him. The two guys in the back with me, they're wrestling around. They're alive. I can't breathe. We're all starting to like, are you guys okay? What do you feel? And so there's movement, which is good. That's what we want, right?
That is good. Now, but you mentioned, did the rescue swimmer just get thrown out the window? Like,
now because of how small that window is, he wasn't able to get the seat. I guess the chair wouldn't allow him. But yeah, he basically popped that window out, and his face was shoved into the snow. So he had his hand, and he was able to kind of dig himself out so that he could breathe. But initially, he was jammed into the snow.
So he was like on the side of the helo that was face into the snow?
Just the way that we were landing, that part of the tail had kind of been covered in snow. Majority of the opening. So yes, he was.
Wow. So he was still in the aircraft, but like half in, half out.
Yes.
Wow. And you mentioned the co-pilot. Well, we'll get into the injury, so I'll save the co-pilot. Right. But the pilot was able to get out pretty quickly. He was mobile?
He was mobile. He was in severe shock. We couldn't even get him to really, the only thing that he could say was, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe this happened. He was able to get himself out, and he was kind of circling the aircraft, just in complete shock, mumbling, screaming, nothing coherent. We couldn't get his attention. We couldn't get him to focus. He just was checked out.
So you're no longer on comms. You don't have like good audio with him, but you hear him in the environment.
Yes, I can hear him. I'm still hearing the comm system is still going, which means the battery's still connected. We still have power. Jet fuel is leaking, but we've still got power.
Oh, I didn't even think of the jet fuel.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Jet fuel is leaking. We popped the fuel bladders. So jet fuel is now in my mouth, in my eyes, and the viscosity of that jet fuel, you get it on your skin, it's going to be with you for 3 days. Yeah.
Oh man, I didn't think of that.
It's dripping down, the side of the cabin. Yeah. So we still have power. The main goal is to get out, is to egress out. So in my mind, I'm going through the checklist, the emergency checklist. I'm going through, I'm hooking my ICS. I can't breathe, but I know we still have power. Jet fuel is leaking. I got to get out of here. So, yeah.
Good on you for sticking to like your training and being able to still operate and think after something so impactful, to say the least, just occurred. Yeah. So, all right. So you're trying to get out.
Trying to get out.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm buried. I'm kind of buried up to my neck. I still have full use of my arms. I can't really feel my legs. The only thing that I can feel is I have this like searing hot pain in my left knee. And obviously my jaw, like my jaw is just aching, and then searing hot pain, and I can't breathe. Those are the only things that are really registering with me right now. And I'm trying to get myself, so my arms still work. And so basically my main goal is to try to get a deep breath, but also start getting stuff off of me so that I can get out. Because I'm going through the checklist. It obviously unhook your ICS, the main goal is to get out. And I'm going through all of that checklist. I'm trying to get stuff off of me. At this point, the flight mech is able to kind of get himself off of me. He's gotten himself out of his seat, and he's starting to kind of get the rescue swimmer kind of back upright so that we can start getting out of the helo. And so they're kind of assisting each other. I'm focused on trying to get a deep breath. I can't really move because I'm still buried. So just suitcases had exploded. It was like just chaos inside the helo, as you can imagine. It was like a hurricane had just gone through. Suitcases had popped open. Pelican cases were, tossed everywhere. I had the barrel of the 50 cal on my lap. Something had severely hit me in the face and had, sent my face shield embedded into my skin. And so at this point, the two guys, they're out of their seats. They're telling me to kind of, get out. And I'm like, I need some help, help unbury me. And so we're working at we're working at getting everything off of me because of how we had landed. Basically everything had kind of just ended up, because I was on my back, everything had ended up on top of me. So it's just basically about getting suitcases moved out of the way. And like I said, we've got snow in the cabin. We've got trees, branches, everything from the outside has now come inside. And, we've got this huge mess.
I'm assuming there's pictures of this, huh? There's like pictures of the crash?
There are, and I'll send you some. Majority of the pictures that we have are from the outside of news helicopters that were flying overhead after we had been kind of rescued, took pictures. And there's pictures of when the National Guard went to go pick up the actual airframe in the spring. They took pictures of all the damage to the aircraft.
I'll put those pictures up on YouTube for all those of you who want to tune in there. Wow. All right. So yeah, you're in the cacophony and you're trying to get out of there.
Yes.
All right. So the swimmer's now, his head's out of the snow. Like he's
gotten himself out. He's gotten himself out. He's gotten himself unbuckled from his seat. He's pushed his seat aside. They're both working to kind of get me unburied because I just had everything piled on top of me. And so we're working and we finally get everything done. There's a tree that's come up right by my hip. And at this point I notice, that I'm bleeding, that my hip is bleeding. And I'm like, okay, so I see that's okay. So that's another wound that I'm going to have to address at some point. And so we finally get everything kind of out of the way. And I said, again, we had flipped over on our side and the main egress point is above my head. So if I were to stand straight up, I would have to grab the edge of the helo, pull myself up, and then slide down the airframe. And so at this point, we're pretty much got majority of me uncovered. And I remember the rescue swimmer says, Gina, you have to stand up. And I go to try and my legs just aren't working. They just can't hold my weight. And I tell him, I can't. And so the rescue swimmer tells the flight mech to go up, and he's laying on the side of the aircraft and he's reaching into the hole. And he says, Gina, lift up your arms because the rescue swimmer is going to get behind me as I lift up my arms, and the flight mech is going to pull me up out of that hole. And so as soon as I reach up my arms, my body just goes back into fetal position. So I look down and there is a gaping wound in my hip, and something is starting to so I'm noticing that my abdominal cavity, something's not right. And I tell him, I can't breathe, whatever is going on, I can't lift my arms up over my head. He's like, you gotta fucking do it. And I'm like, okay. So have to sack up for this one. And I move forward and I kind of throw my hips forward, and I'm able to grab the flight mech, his arms, and the rescue swimmer gets behind me and he kind of pushes me up, and the flight mech pulls me up. And as you know, by that main egress point, there's that flight mech handle, so that when we're running the rescue, you've got something to hang on to. And that literally crashed into my hip. And I just remember as soon as I breached the door of the aircraft, I went fetal and I slid down, and everybody kind of let go, and I slid down the skin of the aircraft and I fell into about 5 foot of powdered snow. And I remember having that rush of adrenaline again. And I remember just being crumpled up at the bottom of this fresh powdered hole. And I'm looking up and I see the flight mech and the rescue swimmer. And I see alongside the wall of this hole that there's blood just alongside this hole, which is coming from my hip. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I still can't breathe. I'm having a really hard time. I know other things in my body are broken and messed up. And he's telling me, we got to get you out, pull up, put your hands up again. And I'm like, I can't. That's the last thing I want to do is actually stretch out my abdomen. So of course I've got to get out of this hole. So I do it and I almost pass out, but they're able to pull me out of this hole and drag me around the helo to where they had deployed the rescue raft, and stuck me in the rescue raft and grabbed the pilot, who was obviously in a huge state of shock, and said, you have to hold this on her hip, because I'm losing a lot of blood from this gaping hip wound. So they went into the luggage, and the rescue swimmer had a robe that he had packed, and he basically grabbed it and put it on this wound in my hip and told the pilot, you have to sit here with her. And he was, trying to get him to focus on anything was just impossible. So I kind of looped my arm into his arm just to keep him with me. And I said, you have to help me. This is the pilot. Yeah. And again, he's in shock. The co-pilot is still in the helo. The dashes, they can't get the dash up to get him out, and his legs are kind of stuck under the pedals. So the rescue swimmer is helping him basically splint up his legs so that when we are rescued, that he can easily transport. So let me paint this picture for you. We're in the middle of a storm. There's no visual reference. We've just had this 22G impact that has rocked all of our worlds. This is probably 10 minutes into the crash. The storm is so heavy that I remember putting my arm in front of my face and I couldn't even see my own hand. So it's so quiet that it's almost deafening. All I can hear is just my own heart beating in my ears and then just people talking. And that was it. So at this point, the co-pilot or the pilot wants to leave me. I can't keep him there anymore. I need his help to kind of hold this robe on this gaping wound that I have. So he leaves. He can't sit still any longer. And I'm trying to at least adjust my body in a way that I can breathe because I'm still panting. My legs, so I know both of my legs are broken at this point because this left knee has completely shifted backwards, so it looks like a cricket leg. It's bending in all the wrong places. And then my right foot is just dangling. I have nothing. So I know that I've broken my legs because neither one of them works. So I'm trying to tuck them underneath me, and I'm trying to at least get my abdomen in a position so that I can breathe a little bit. So I'm trying to keep pressure on this wound. And at this point, I'm by myself sitting in this rescue raft thinking, holy crap, am I going to die out here? And I remember looking down at this hip wound. I'm trying to assess the damage a little bit, kind of take inventory. And I remember looking down at this hip wound, and I see bone, I see fascia, I see tendons, I see my blood vessels. Everything that you just don't want to see is just in there. There's bark, there's pine needles in there. It just was this bloody tissue mess, this gaping hole. And it was probably about the size of a cantaloupe. Just blood, tissue, pine needles, pine tree, bark, everything in there just hanging out. And I'm like, okay, cool. Okay. You don't see that every day. So I'm like, I'm losing some blood. I'm losing some serious blood here. I'm bleeding I've broken my nose. I'm bleeding into my mouth. I'm swallowing a lot of blood. I'm just not feeling so good, you know? I'm in the beginning stages of hypothermia. I feel, okay, so the pain is so hot and searing. And with that adrenaline starting to kind of wear off a little bit, you start to feel things. So I'm starting to feel like my neck and my back and my knee is just on fire. And my face is on fire. And, I'm bleeding from everything that's been embedded in my face. I've broken my nose. I know I'm bleeding down the back of my throat. My abdomen, something's seriously wrong with my abdomen. Both my legs are broken, but at least my arms work, right? So at this point, I asked the rescue swimmer, I said, hey, I'm starting to think a little bit, and I'm thinking, okay, so we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're at the bottom of this mountain. The weather is so bad I can't even see my own hand in front of my face. I'm losing blood at a pretty rapid rate, and I'm in the beginning stages of hypothermia. There is a really good chance I'm going to die out here. And being an only child.
You said all this to the rescue. You said all this to the rescue.
No, I'm thinking this in my mind. I'm thinking okay, so I have to be real here. Everybody else bumps and bruises except for the co-pilot who's got a compound fracture, obviously, but everybody else pretty much kind of is okay except for me. And I know that if I don't get medical attention within the next couple hours, there's a good chance I'm going to die either from giving into hypothermia, blood loss, or something else. And so I'm thinking this in my mind. And so the rescue swimmer, I said, hey, can you grab my phone out of the cabin? So he found my phone and brought it over. And the only thing I was really thinking about at this point was I need to leave something for my parents, because if I die, I want them to know that I was thinking about them. I want them to know that, hey, I survived the crash, but other things kind of got me. But I was thinking about you. I love you. I hope you know that, just anything. I mean, I've just been through this crash. My mind isn't exactly super clear, but I at least wanted to leave them with something like, hey, in these final moments of my life, I was thinking about you and I want you to know I love you. So all of us had AT&T.
I wonder, I'm sorry to get off topic a little bit. I wonder how they would get into the phone. you know, if you happen to have passed away, how do they get, like, unless you don't have a password, like how do they get into your phone to your notes, you know, or whatever?
I was trying to text them. Essentially, I was trying to send them a text to say, hey. So everybody in the crew had AT&T except for one person. I think it was Darren, the rescue swimmer, who had Verizon. And only one of us had service way out there in the middle of nowhere. So little
Verizon?
did I know. Yes, Verizon. Little did I know at this point that he had already contacted. He'd been in contact with maintenance control. And maintenance control had called comms and said, hey, you need to get the 6040 to come back and see if they can do anything to help these guys, because I guess they had called maintenance control, called the hospital, and care flight wouldn't even launch because the weather was so bad. So all this is happening, and I don't know what's happening, but maintenance control, because he was able to get hold of maintenance control and comms, they called the sheriff's department in Salt Lake City, because we had ELTs going off too. So they knew our coordinates.
What are ELTs?
Because of where we were, the emergency locator beacons that we have in the helicopter. And anytime you crash, those go off, and it gives you basically, it pings, it gives the coordinates of where we're at so that we can be rescued.
So those did go off, right?
They were going off, and people were getting our signal. They knew that we had crashed. And so the comm center in Virginia had called the sheriff's department in Salt Lake, and the sheriff's department had launched their search and rescue team that are familiar with that area. So they were on their way, but none of us knew that. I could hear, after a little while, you can hear the helicopter way up in the distance, but it's so far away, and we were down so far, they couldn't do anything except fly overhead. They couldn't send someone down to us. They couldn't even land. And I mean, it's not like we could just throw a rescue swimmer down on the cable and you know what I mean? We were so far down at the bottom. At least they knew we were down there and they were up there. And we could hear them. But I didn't know that search and rescue team had been launched and they were coming in on snowmobiles. So I've got my phone and I'm trying to send my parents these texts, and they're just not going through because I have no service. And I'm trying. And I'm thinking, okay, so I know they're not going to go through. I couldn't call anybody. I was trying to call my parents. So I at least, there were texts in my phone that when I finally did get service, they had my phone, they would be able to read it. So I ended up turning off my phone at that point because I wanted them to, wanted to be able to have it. And so I'm sitting there and it's just getting a little bit more worse. I can't breathe, hypothermia. I feel like I'm on fire and I'm wanting to take off clothes, even though I know that's not the right thing. Darren is putting more clothes on me. I've gone a certain shade of gray. I see I'm bleeding into the rescue raft. So I know I'm losing blood, and everything's starting to kind of come into, pinpoint vision for me. Things are really starting to slow down. I feel really tired. All I want to do is just kind of go to sleep. And I knew that if I went to sleep and just kind of gave into that feeling, that I would be dead. And what I did is I took my elbow and I jammed it into that hip wound just to get a little bit more adrenaline in myself. And I remember cranking on my knee just to try to get my body to respond and just kind of keep myself awake. And I remember talking to myself and singing to myself just to stay awake. And I knew I was talking crazy. I was slowly losing it at this point, but I knew that I needed to stay awake. So at this point, we've probably been out there for about 45 minutes, and we hear snowmobiles coming in from somewhere. And
that's fast.
Right? So things are happening. And like I said, all of this was going on behind the scenes that none of us really knew about. And so I'm thinking, and I remember thinking, how are they going to get to us? How? There's no way that. The only thing I could logically think of was that helo, they were going to come and get us, but I couldn't figure out how. So obviously search and rescue teams are on their way, and we're getting close to an hour. So they finally come, and I am just on the verge of losing it. I'm sweating. I'm hot. My vision has just gone pinpointed. I'm trying to rock. I'm ramming myself in the hip just to try to get some kind of adrenaline response to keep myself.
Are you alone, or is the rescue swimmer attending to you?
He's coming back. He's checking in on me, and he's slowly watching me go from a nice, pink shade to purple to gray to now this greenish beige color that's just not good. And so on this search and rescue team, who is it except the father-in-law of an AMT that I'm stationed with in Elizabeth City, who happens to be a cardiovascular surgeon on the search and rescue team, who comes and they say, handle her. We'll worry about the only other person that's injured, which is the co-pilot who's, got a compound fracture. He's splinted. He's ready for transport, but she's literally on the verge of death. And so he took my vitals and said, you got to get out of here. He threw me over the back of a snowmobile. And again, I'm 6'1", I'm all leg. So essentially they threw me like a sack of potatoes on the back because there's no way I could sit. What do you mean like a sack of potatoes?
Like a dead dog?
Like a dead dog on my abdomen. I'm laying over the back of the seat. My legs are dragging.
Don't they have a litter? Like mountain. I feel like the search and rescue team's got a litter in the back of the snowmobile.
Nothing.
They don't have like a...
They threw me right over like a sack of potatoes and walked me up the mountain. So 2,250 feet, we trucked right up that mountain. And so the helo had finally been able to kind of land. It wasn't really a super safe place, but enough for me to kind of just get into the helo.
This is the Coast Guard helo, the other Coast
Guard helo. Yep, the 6040. Cool. And what they had done when they had been called back by comms, they immediately flipped around and they had found this man's land who had this land out in the middle of nowhere, and he had an iron gate around his land. So what they did, they pulled into a hover over his backyard, shoved out all the non-essential, non-rescue equipment out into his front yard. There were suitcases, Pelican cases, a 50 cal, everything kind of just shoved out into his front yard. They kept
jackpot for the farmer.
Right? So they kept only the essential rescue equipment and then turned right back around and started heading towards us. So they were able to land on the top of the mountain. And I remember laying on my abdomen. I can't breathe. The exhaust from the ski-doo is like right there. I'm sucking in exhaust, but it kept me awake because I had that surge of adrenaline because I'm laying on my abdomen. My legs are getting tangled up in branches. It's just a huge mess. But they finally get me to the top, load me in the helo. And the aircraft commander of the 6040 says, I'm not leaving without the aircraft commander of the 6028. And they're like, you got to get out of here. She's literally on the verge of death. And so they finally load me in, throw me in there, and I die. I'm dead. They're doing CPR. They pull into a hover.
Who's doing CPR? The surgeon? The surgeon's in there with you?
No, he had to go back down the mountain. It's the flight mech of the 6040. I know his name, which I'll tell you in a little while. I can't think of it right now, but doing CPR on me. We pull up over the storm. And if you've ever been to Salt Lake City, they have the best trauma surgeon center in all the West Coast. It's literally carved into the side of the mountain. So we pulled up over the mountain range and up over the storm, and it was right directly in front of us. Like straight, like ass up, nose down, just hauling ass straight to the hospital. We didn't have time to call the trauma team. We land on their flight deck. They come out, load me on a gurney, and start wheeling me in, having no idea. And all of a sudden, there's no military in Salt Lake City. What's a Blackhawk, a Coast Guard Blackhawk doing on their tarmac, unloading, a dead girl who's, bleeding everywhere. And so I remember a nurse kind of climbing on top of me and cutting at my flight suit and opening up my flight suit. And I remember the blade, when they're unloading me out of the helo, I remember the blade, feeling the pressure of the blades, pushing down on me and then loading me onto a gurney. And I just remember them cutting my flight suit and then just immediately panicking and putting it back together and then laying on top of me. And then I just got wheeled into the hospital. And that's another story. Finally assessing all the damage and what was happening.
Well, let's unpack before we get into the hospital. Let's unpack a little bit of everything that just happened. So, well, first of all right. So more or less an hour goes by the time they're kind of starting to package you up here from the snowmobile. How's the pilot doing at this point? That the pilot that was kind of in shock.
Still in shock. I kind of lost track of him, to be honest. Once he left me, I was kind of just sitting by myself. I would see the rescue swimmer come in and check on me. But for the most part, I was pretty much kind of removed from the crash site, probably about 20 feet away where the rescue raft was, kind of set up. And I'm sitting in there by myself, just kind of keeping myself awake, singing, kind of doing my own thing,
Well, one of the things you're basically talking about here is and it's in all the survival books is the first thing you need to survive is a will to survive. And it clearly sounds like you had that because you're sending notes to your parents. So you're clearly in a place where you're already fighting, but secondly, you're creating pain to keep yourself conscious because you don't want to slip into the dark. So just that alone just shows the mindset that you had of, not quitting, not perishing that day. What kept you like so motivated to stay alive? Do you know?
I'm not going out like this. I mean, I'm not going to die at the bottom of a ravine, especially after I've survived the initial crash, like I've survived the hard part. Now it's just getting to the hospital. I knew once I got to the hospital, I would be okay. And so it's just basically pushing and just pushing every boundary, pushing past every boundary that you yourself know, everything. And it just comes down to, I'm not going to die today. I am not going to die today. And essentially that's kind of what it came down to. And I wish, a lot of people ask me, oh, did you ever see the light? Did you ever, because I'm dying. I mean, I'm bleeding out. I never had any spiritual experience except for the fact that I'm not going out like this. I'm not going to die. I've survived this initial crash. I'm not going to die today. And that kept going through my mind. Like, it's not my time yet. It's not my time yet.
It's something to talk about how incredibly efficient it sounds like all the wheels that came together to make this rescue happen. So like, I don't know if you knew this about me, but I'm still an emergency medical technician, but I'm also technically certified as a wilderness emergency medical technician. And one of the first things they kind of teach you is, get ready for the long haul when you're out in a wilderness environment. Like, it's no longer the reality is if somebody's in like a severe life-threatening situation like you were, and at least you had a helo nearby, you had like resources that, you had these location devices with you to get this operation going. But the reality is, if you're like on an outdoor trip or something, sure, you have potentially those location devices, but you have to be ready for the long haul. And if somebody has a life-threatening injury like you, the sad truth is you could be a cardiovascular surgeon. It doesn't make a difference. Like, you're probably going to die out there. Right. And the fact that they were able to get you out, that was probably the thing that saved your life. The fact that they were able to do it so quickly. Because in our training, they're like, it's probably going to take half a day at the earliest, at the quickest in most of these outback, like in the outskirts locations. So that's really crazy. And it's pretty funny that you had a surgeon, and like the first thing he does, he's like, same thing. He's like, I can't do anything out here. Right. Let's go.
Yeah. And the fact that he was related to one of the guys I worked with in Elizabeth City, I mean, it was such a small world. And that's the crazy thing about the story is, if you don't believe in miracles, once you hear the story and all the little things that happened to get me from point A to point B, and things that even in the years going up into the crash that took place to help me survive, it's such a crazy story. And you have to believe in miracles after all this, because it just was so many little things that came together that helped me survive. So
now I'm assuming, like, as far as like recognize or like learning the connection that happened in the aftermath, like it wasn't like oh my God, you're
no, it was all the aftermath. Yeah.
Wow.
It's all the aftermath. Yeah.
Crazy. All right. So you're in the hospital. What's going on?
I'm in the hospital. So essentially, by that time, my parents are notified. The captain of the air station calls my parents and says, Gina's been in a helicopter crash. And they're just like, they're dying. They're in Washington State. I've crashed in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so they can't get a flight out fast enough because of the storm. They can't get a flight to Salt Lake City. So they essentially just grab some clothes, grab their dog, load up the car, and they just 100 miles an hour straight from Washington State to Salt Lake City. And as that's happening, so I get brought in, and as soon as I get to the hospital, I'm like, okay, I did my part. I can kind of let go now, because my body was so desperately, I mean, at this point, when I felt them loading me on, it was taking everything I could just to continue to pant, just to breathe. It was almost like I was giving maximum effort just to be able to keep myself, not even just conscious, because I didn't even care about that anymore, but just going, still alive. And I knew that I'd made it to the hospital. At this point, I'd done everything I could. I got, I made it. Now I can let go. And so it was major. I mean, they took me straight to the trauma surgery center, and it was just go from there. And essentially, this is the outcome of the crash. This is what it had done to me. We talked about, obviously, my jaw, everything was starting to ache. I was starting to feel things. So starting from the top, I had broken my face. I'd broken my nose in 5 different places. I'd broken my jaw, knocked out 6 of my teeth, and cracked 4 of them. I had shattered my left orbital socket and my cheekbone, and that was completely kind of caved in. Broke my jaw, broke my neck, my C4 and my C3. I broke my back. It totally shattered my right hip. As we had talked about, that was where I was bleeding from. The thing I didn't know was that my abdomen had been split from my breastbone to my pelvic bone completely open, and my guts had been ripped out of my body and were being contained by my flight suit. That's why I wasn't able to breathe. It's because my guts had been ripped out, and it had ripped my spleen from my small intestine from my colon had been completely dissected, and it had punctured my spleen. So I'm bleeding internally, and the only thing that's really keeping me together is my flight vest. So it was basically, it caused, my abdomen swelled up so much that it was allowing that blood pressure to continue and keeping keeping that poison blood pumping through my system. So I fractured the base of my skull, had crushed in, and it actually crushed in it had caved in my helmet and crushed the back of my left occipital bone, had completely caved in my skull, ripped out my guts, completely shattered my hip. I had torn all the ligaments and tendons in my left knee, and it had snapped my patella in half. And so my whole leg was turned the opposite direction. And then I completely shattered my right ankle, my talus, everything was completely shattered. So I had broken my neck, my back, my skull, my face, my hip, my whole internals were just completely ripped out, and both my legs were broken. So that was the extent of the damage. And so once I got to the operating table, they immediately went to where I was bleeding, which was my abdomen. I only had 2 pints left in my system, 2 pints of blood, and it was poisoned because all of my intestinal fluid I had been bleeding into myself. And because my intestines had been torn, all that intestinal fluid and bile and everything had been leaking into my blood. So I was pumping poisoned blood back through my system. And I had lost so much blood that they had 4 different nurses. I had 17 blood transfusions just in the first day. And they were just squeezing blood into me, just plugging holes at that point. And it was just all abdominal. So here I am, I'm on the operating table. And of course I'm out of it. I don't know anything at this point. They're calling my parents. My parents are driving 100 miles an hour. It's a 12-hour trip from Vancouver, Washington to Salt Lake City. They're driving 100 miles an hour in the middle of the day. The doctor's calling them every 45 minutes. How close are you? Because we're keeping her alive because we want you to be able to say goodbye. So my parents think that I'm dying, and I'm dying. I mean, they're plugging holes as fast as they can. They're squeezing blood into me. They've got me on artificial. I mean, I can't breathe for myself. I am completely shut down, and they're plugging holes. And so calling my parents, you got to get here. You got to get here. My dad's like, I can't go any faster. I'm literally driving 100 miles an hour. And so it took my parents 12 hours to get there. And they're able to kind of plug just the major trauma. At this point, I had blood. They put me in a coma. Sorry. They put me in a coma for 7 days is the total amount of time. Sorry. So they put me in a coma for 7 days. When my parents finally do get to me, I have blood. I mean, I'm covered. They couldn't even wash me. The only thing that they could do was just basically contain my abdominal cavity. And it was just cover me in saran wrap and warm blankets and then put me in a coma. And they were going to just take it as it came. So here I am. I'm in the hospital. I'm swollen 3 times my size. I have blood caked. My face, as my whole face, the left side of my face is completely caved in. I'm swollen. I've got plastic pieces still, embedded in my face shield. My nose has completely shifted to the side. My jaw is shifted to the side. I didn't look human. So when my mom came in to see me, as soon as they got there, my mom said, "That's not my kid. That's not my daughter." And, my dad was just in complete shock. I just didn't look human. And so they allowed my mom to kind of clean me up while I was, in a coma. And she's trying to, get the blood. I mean, I'm just caked in blood. And she's trying to take care of me the best that she can, because they were just solely focused on just getting all the holes plugged, get blood into me that wasn't poisoned, which I think I was in surgery for about 13 hours total.
This is like such a nightmare. This is like, this is like, just being like having some experience in the medical field. It's just so many things are life threatening. And the sad truth of it is like your intestines hanging out, not the biggest concern, to be honest. That's not the biggest thing that you've labeled in the list of injuries you just have. Like you mentioned the skull. You mentioned, pelvis is a huge situation. Like that's always why, like when you do your checks, as far as like a survivor, sure, you go through like your airway, your breathing, circulation, whatnot. But when you're going down the body, you're checking the pelvis and you're checking for those fractures, because like there's so many things that can create a life-threatening injury in the pelvic area. And yours was just smashed to pieces. And like, sure, you have the aesthetic, and I would say anybody who's tuning in, check out Gina on YouTube, because Gina doesn't look like a shit show. Like it's incredible. Like you're a beautiful person, and
thank you.
And like, yeah, honestly, when I tuned in, because we never met before, when I tuned in and saw you, I was like, wow, like Gina looks great. And what you're describing is like a smashed up, like, Toyota from the 70s that just was at the bottom of a ravine. So, I mean, wow.
So that's 7 days that I'm in a coma. I had 30 surgeries. 22 surgeries in that first 7 days. It just was anything that would pop up, they would completely address. I mean, they'd have to kind of address it as it comes, because once they kind of got all the blood supply, my intestine, everything was so swollen that it couldn't even fit in my abdominal cavity. All they could do is just pile everything on top of me and wrap it in saran wrap, and then just debride as much as they could. And with my hip wound too, I had bark, pine needles, dirt, all the stuff that's, as being dragged through the forest, it just,
those are surgeries in themselves to just get those things out. And like you were a flight, basically a flight mechanic. I know you were an aviation electronical technician, but one of the things, like, you deal with corrosion. Well, the human body, same thing. You got to deal with infection. That's our corrosion. So, that's a surgery in itself, to take care of making sure that these massive injuries are not getting infected.
Right. And that basically leads me into, they finally pull me out of a coma after 7 days. And, I'm just waking up and completely unaware of where I am, what's happened to my body. I've got breathing tubes in, I'm a mess. It's a complete, and then they want to interview you. Obviously, anytime there's a military crash, CGI wants to come in, and I remember I see my family. So here I am, I've got breathing tubes, and all I can do is just open my eyes, and I see my whole entire family. There's like 20 people sitting right in front of me, and the doctors shoo them out. They pull out my breathing tube, and then in comes, 2 CGI officers, and they want to talk about everything.
Get the fuck out of here.
2 hours. No kidding. 2 hours. Didn't even
this is 7 days in?
7 days after. Yep,
but your family's just there, and now like the investigating officers are there from the Coast Guard. So CGIS, everyone is Coast Guard investigating services. So 2 of those goofballs show up. Wow, and they just had to go down I mean,
They wanted
I
to know
understand.
everything from how much I slept, what I had to drink the night before, how much water I took in, where I slept, how many, what food did I eat? I mean, not that that crash was by any means my fault, nothing I could have done, but they wanted to know what I ate, how many hours I got to sleep, what time I got up in the morning, what I had for breakfast. And we went over it. I mean, it was just 2 hours of them going over the same thing. They wanted to hear every second from the crash. They wanted to know everything, and they wanted to go through it several times over. And here I am. I have no idea what's going on with my body. I haven't talked to a doctor. The only thing that's happened to me is a nurse has come in and taken out my breathing tube, and then 2 suited people came in and immediately started interviewing me.
That's messed up.
So I have no clue. Yeah.
That's it.
Can't
So
even
you
say
come
hi
out,
to my family.
you come out of your coma and you're investigating. You're on investigation. Yeah. So, and you say, you're not at fault, but in this interview process, do you feel a little bit like you're at fault?
Oh, they make you feel like crap. They make you feel like everything's your fault. And I'm just like, wait a second. I'm not the one flying the plane. What did I didn't drink any alcohol the night before. Everything, but they make you feel like it's all your fault, and they want to go through. So back it up. Tell me that one more time. Huh. Okay. Huh.
Trying to find holes in your story,
right?
While you have holes in your body.
Dang. Right? So no mercy, zero mercy. Yeah.
Just know that everyone that's like getting investigated by anybody, I guess, in any situation, unfortunately, these people are typically not your friends, even though like in this situation, they kind of are, but that's how they lead their job is like, it's so confrontational. Right.
And then I'm immediately put on the phone as soon as they're done. I'm immediately put on the phone with Admiral Thad Allen, who wants to talk to me and he's a great man, but I'm just like, A, I want to say hi to my family. And B, I want to know what the hell is going on with my body, because I have no clue. The last thing I remember is being pulled out of the helo onto a gurney. And then, apparently I didn't even know how many days I'd been in a coma. Honestly, I had nothing. Nobody would tell me anything.
The crash happened in 2010, Gina, and it is now 2015.
Oh my God. I mean, I tried asking the investigators, and none of it. They didn't want to have a personal conversation. They didn't want to tell me anything. They just wanted to know what they wanted to know. And I was like, I see. Okay. I'll remember this.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Incredible.
But yes. So moving into the next day. So I'm awake for a whole 24 hours before another emergency sets in, and I'm put again into another coma. So we talked about the hip, and we talked about, there being bark and major infection. Anytime the inside of your body meets the outside world, there is major infection alert happening. And to have everything on the outside, bark, tree, dirt, everything be inside my internal wounds, jet fuel, things like that, it's going to be an issue. And I remember talking to a nurse and saying, something doesn't feel right. And she said to me, honey, your whole body's on the outside. Everything doesn't feel right. So all I can say is you are the best advocate for your own body. Your body will tell you when you know something isn't right, push, because they ignored me for a whole day, and I went septic. I had sepsis and I almost died. In fact, I did die, and I was able to come out of it. So they rushed me into the hospital. In fact, they ended up just taking me to the burn unit and keeping me in a sterile environment for the whole 2 months that I was there, because I was just having surgery after surgery. But I went septic, and I'm telling the nurse, something doesn't feel right. And come to find out, they had tried to reattach some of my bowels together, my intestines together, and it ended up leaking into my hip, and then all the dirt and microbes from the trees and everything like that was eating away at my muscle tissue, and it had poisoned my blood, and they had ignored it for 24 hours. And so by the time that it had gotten so bad to where I have this huge fever, my body's shutting down, my organs are starting to shut down, they rush me in. I have to say goodbye to my parents because they're telling my parents, I don't think she's going to make it out of this. So I remember before they put me down, as they're wheeling me into the burn unit, I'm saying goodbye to my parents because I don't know if I'm going to wake up from this. So having to go through that again, just when you think you've made it, the next day I'm sweating, I don't feel good, something's definitely not right, to, okay, I love you, I'm thinking of you, if I die, I'll come back and haunt you. I don't know, like, what do you say to your parents, just when you think you've made it, and then they're telling you, you're not going to make it out of this. And so obviously that was another coma that I was in for about 3 or 4 days. And I survived that, but it was a lot of touch and go. It was basically, and the thing is, okay, so I'm going through all this stuff and I know on my end, it's very severe, but what's being told to my colleagues and what's being told to my Coast Guard supervisors back home is, she'll be in the hospital for a week. She'll be fine. She'll be on her way home. They're telling everybody, oh, it's minor. So they're thinking that I'm okay.
Why are they saying that?
That's what I don't know. They were trying to keep everybody calm because everybody that I was in the crash with, they got to go home. They were shipped back on a C-130, except for the compound fracture.
The co-pilot.
Steve Chervney, the co-pilot who had a compound fracture. I think he was still at the hospital at that time, but everybody else had gotten to go home. They went home to Elizabeth City, got their hero's welcome, and everybody was fine. Here I am fighting for my life, but all my coworkers are being told, oh, she'll be fine. It's, she's fine. And I'm literally fighting for my life.
That's the opposite. Usually in the medical field, that's one thing that you never say is like, well, especially in like first responder status. I don't know how it works in the actual, when you're in the hospital setting, but usually you never guarantee anything. So, and note that to anybody that's ever in like helping somebody out in a medical emergency, I know the reflex is typically to say, you're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. But that's not true. And like, that's something that we get in training is like, don't guarantee anything. Like you don't know that that's true. You can't, well, I mean, all right, sometimes you can, like, sometimes it is a minor injury. And like, if you have enough experience, yes, all right, yeah, you'll be all right. Relax, Mm-hmm. But for the most part, you never guarantee like somebody's health. You never say it's going to be okay. And I'm so very surprised in your kind of situation that they straight up were, kind of misinforming the. And I
understand not wanting, you don't want all your coworkers, because I mean, you spend more time with your Coast Guard family than you do your actual family. And so I understand not wanting them to panic but we're a family, and yet they're telling everybody, oh, she'll be fine. And here I am, I'm desperately fighting for my life day in and day out while I'm in the hospital. And so it was, from what they were being told back home to what was actually happening was complete misinformed. And it was all because they wanted people just to get back to work and not really focus on, hey, this could happen to you. Because you go into aviation. I went into aviation knowing, hey, there's a good chance that I may have a helicopter crash. It's just the reality of it. Doing what we do, we fly in hurricanes. We fly, when no one else will. That there's a good chance, and that's what you train for. And the more informed you are, the better your chance of survival. But to be telling my coworkers back home that I'm fine, just because you don't want them to worry and have their minds taken off of the work that needs to be done back home, I think is cruel and unusual. Yeah.
So, all right. So you go into septic shock and you're with us today. So they fixed it.
Yes. They did. I had a wound vac on for a long time. I stayed in the hospital in Salt Lake City in that burn unit for about 4 months. And then when I was stable enough to be transported, they took me to Oregon, where I was in the hospital for about 6 months. So I was in the hospital for quite a long time.
The better part of a year.
And they didn't even fix my legs until a year after. So I was literally just going from one surgery to the next. They had to go in and kind of rebuild my skull, and they were able to kind of cut through my upper lip and go and fix my jaw and build scaffolding to basically build up my cheekbone and to reset my nose. So all of that happened when I was in Oregon. So about 5-6 months after the fact, but my legs didn't get fixed for a good year after, and it was 6 years and 64 surgeries of just every 3 months.
You're paraplegic for at least a year, but how long does it take for you to get back on your feet?
That's another year of intense physical therapy, learning how to walk again, learning how to climb stairs, learning how to, I had lost all my muscle. I had no muscle in my legs. Your body cannibalizes all of that stuff when you don't use it. I was in a wheelchair, I was in a walker for a really long time, and having to learn all those basic steps again, and it's not just one and done surgery on your knee. I had 4 surgeries on my knee, 3 surgeries on my ankle. And every surgery, it's a major setback. and it's intense physical therapy. It's not just, oh yeah, it's easy peasy. You know what I mean? Like, these are all things that we really take for granted until you have to relearn them again. And so it was a really grueling 6 years of just a lot of physical therapy, a lot of trying to not only deal with the PTSD, but trying to gather that strength to continue to push as you're facing the same things over and over again. You feel like, okay, you have a surgery and there's more, but you kind of gain a little bit of strength, and then you're taken out again with another surgery, and you're down for 3 months, and you're building that strength. And I remember the first couple of surgeries, I was bouncing back fairly quickly, but after you have your 30th surgery, you're not bouncing back as fast. It's a long, arduous process. And on top of that, you're dealing with PTSD that all of a sudden has just taken over your life. You're dealing with, medications. I'm on morphine. I'm on oxycodone. I'm on fentanyl. I'm on, the horse tranquilizer. I'm got a morphine drip. It was so much medication that you just are completely checked out, and what that does to your body, the aftermath of all that stuff. A lot of those medications come with severe depression, suicidal thoughts, sleeplessness. So you're battling, it's a constant battle, and you want so badly to see something different, because for that 6 years, it was surgery, PTSD, physical therapy, PTSD battling, surgery, physical therapy, surgery, physical, and you're seeing the same thing, and you want so badly for it to be a different outcome. And it's just the same thing over and over. It's just like, I want to do something different. I want to finally be well. I want to close the chapter on this book and actually have a life again. Like, is this what my life looks like? Just constant surgeries. And so under anesthesia, major surgeries, 64, but I've had well over 120 just outpatient procedures where they just go in and maybe do just under general, go in and remove some bone chips or things like that. So it's just the same thing over and over. And it just seems like it's a lot of hopelessness. You just never know when you're going to see the end of this. And so 2016, yeah.
So the first one is, how do you approach this? Like, what kind of mindset are you approaching this long haul of, because everyone that's been through physical therapy knows how arduous it is, how annoying it is. And, it's a redundant cycle of constant. So that's the first question. Keep that one in mind. And then the second is, how did you get yourself out of it?
So no one tells you, when I was in the hospital, everyone tells you, you're going to be fine. It's going to, you're going to bounce back from this. In my warped brain, not knowing the extent of all my injuries, I thought I'd be able to go and do my job again, that I'd go back into aviation, that I would go back to my normal job, thinking that maybe after a year of intensive surgeries and physical therapy, my mind was thinking, I'm going to go back and do what I love to do. Like, this is just, and people in the Coast Guard were telling me, you can get a waiver for everything except, like, we can get you waivers. And I'm thinking, cool, I'll just get waivers. Because of my brain injury, because it crushed my occipital lobe, I lost all my peripheral vision up, ahead, and to the right. And then I lost 37% of my hearing. I could get a waiver for losing my spleen, for, everything that's happened in my body, having, cadaver replacement bone, in my knee, all the tendons and ligaments were cadaver, having my hip piece back together. I can get waivers for everything. The only thing I couldn't get a waiver for was my peripheral vision, because I had lost that to the right peripheral vision. So everybody was telling me, you can get waivers. You'll go back to being, once you have these surgeries, you'll be fine. So nobody really tells you right out of the gate, you're going to live your life. You're going to have pain for the rest of your life. Life is not going to ever look like it used to for you. And you're going to really kind of battle things that you never have had to battle with before. Nobody tells you those things, which I really think is a huge disservice. And you would think that stuff would be obvious. I'd never had a surgery before. I didn't know. I'd never broken a bone, So pretty much having my whole entire body broken, and my doctors are telling me, once you go through the surgeries, you're going to be fine. You're going to be good as new. You're going to be better than new. I'm thinking, sweet. I'm going to go back to doing what I did. Nobody told me the reality of what I was in for. Nobody warned me. And I don't know if it should have been obvious, but nobody told me, look, this is going to be a long, hard road for you. You are never going to be the same. You are never going to know life like you knew before. It's going to be a huge uphill battle for you. Nobody told me that. So as it was coming, you basically just have to sack up and say, this is not, like, I was told after the first couple surgeries, and because my legs had been out of commission for so long, that I'd never be able to walk again, that I probably would have to either walk with a cane, a walker, and supplement with a wheelchair, because I just would never be able to walk again. And that in and of itself, I was like, nah, that's not going to work for me. I'm sorry. It just, nah, no. And so going through all those surgeries, and as painful and horrific as those surgeries were, having to go through the PT therapy is in and of itself arduous and horrific, and you want to die. But ultimately, I wanted to get as close to my old life as I possibly could. It doesn't happen. You have to basically kind of find a new norm. But the only thing that I had known for my whole entire life was, I'm stubborn as hell. There's no way that I'm going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I'm going to have to do whatever I'm going to have to do. And I mean, I'm so stubborn that I tore staples out of my body. I tore stitches. I had to go back because, I would be working so hard in physical therapy that I'd, rip stitches and staples and all this other crazy stuff. And so you really have to, it's not for the faint of heart, and you really have to at some point, even though your brain is kind of working against you and you're battling this PTSD that you've never known before, and it comes like a complete wave and it takes over you, you have to really kind of just lean in and say, I can't, this is not the life that I want for the rest of my life. This is not who I want to be. I don't want people to look at me and say, oh, you poor thing, what happened? I want people to look at me and not know that I've gone through what I've gone through. And so for me, it was basically just leaning into my faith, because there was no way I could do this on my own. It was so painful and so hard that I had to basically just say, okay, God, like, I need help. I can't do this on my own, because it's so overwhelming. I mean, I basically had to find a home in this body that didn't work for me anymore. It wouldn't do what I said. And my brain is now working against me. There were so many times where I didn't trust myself to make a decision because my brain was just not working right. And so you lose all trust in yourself, and you lose any kind of awareness of your body, because all of a sudden it's like working against you and your brain's working against you. And it's just like, holy crap, how am I supposed to live in this body where everything's kind of fighting against me? And so it really is, you have to lean in, you have to kind of hang on to the pain a little bit and just kind of really fight, because you are in for a fight, really, truly.
Wow. How did the, of course this is no one's fault, but how did the pilots feel in the aftermath?
He felt horrible. I mean, of course he wasn't being told the truth. He wasn't being told she's fighting for her life. So he didn't know. All he was hearing, and I think that they were trying to keep that from him because he was already having a hard enough time with the fact that, here we've crashed. We've gone through this. He's put lives in danger. And, granted, there was some, you can assign fault wherever you want. Granted, it was the weather, it was pilot error. It was a lot of little things. And we talk about the Swiss cheese model. Things just kind of aligned to that happening. And I think when he found out the truth of what I was really struggling with, that I could possibly die, it didn't go very well. He didn't take that very well. And I think anybody, if you're responsible for harming anyone or causing someone, death or harm, you can't help but take that personally. And I never really got to talk to him much, but I was able to send him an email when I was a little bit more kind of aware, after I'd gotten to back to Oregon State where my family was. And I was kind of settling into, okay, things are going to be different for me. And at least I made it this far, and I could kind of keep going. I wrote him an email and I told him, I said, look, I hope that you don't take any of this on yourself, because it was an accident. Accidents happen. I'm thankful that I didn't die. You know, I'm here, and I know I'm a fighter, and I want you more than anything to know that I don't think this is your fault. I don't blame you. I don't want you to take anything from this. I don't want you to carry this burden throughout your life and carry this heaviness around thinking that, you know, you've ruined my life. Granted, my life is different and I have a new normal now, but I'm so thankful that I'm alive, and everything happens for a reason. And so if anything, I hope that he's let that go, that he doesn't carry that weight around with him, because I don't want that for him. Yeah, my life is.
How did that pilot respond? If you want to share.
He didn't. I just have to hope that that he doesn't carry that around with him. I hope that he took my words seriously, that I don't blame him. I don't hold anything against him. I'm not mad. I'm not upset. You know, that there's forgiveness there. And I hope, and sometimes I think a lot of it is we're harder on ourselves than other people are on us. And I hope that he's allowed himself that forgiveness, because I have no ill will. I don't, you know, I know it was just as traumatic for him as it was for me. And I'm okay. I'm happy. My life is in a good spot, regardless of that stuff that I've had to go through. It's made me better. It's humbled me as a human, and made me more compassionate to others. So all in all, it worked out the way it's supposed to. And sometimes these horrible things that we go through, you can't see it while you're in it, because it's so painful and it's so hard, and you really are fighting for your life. But once you kind of are on the outside and you're able to look back, you know, I am better. And I am to the point where I can thank God that it happens. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I hope no one has to go through what I went through, because it's hard and it sucks. It's painful. It takes everything out of you. But I'm better, and I'm good. So yeah.
What did you learn? I mean, so much, right? But what would you say is the one takeaway from this 10-year, I mean, it's ongoing, of course, but right. You know, 10-year experience, because that was 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah, gosh, there's so much that I take away from it. It's really made me more aware of the veteran community. It's made me a lot more compassionate towards people dealing with things in general. You don't have to have combat experience or go through a helicopter crash to have trauma. Trauma is trauma. Our body, I know a lot of people, they say to me, oh, I can't complain because of everything that you've gone through. No, trauma is trauma is trauma is trauma. You don't have to go through a helicopter crash to have PTSD. You don't have to go through combat experience. You don't have to have survived a rape or survived a serious, yes, those are severe examples of what people have gone through and survived, but those aren't the only ways that PTSD, that's not the only form it comes in. It can come from the smallest of things. And it's really taught me to be more compassionate. And it's really made me more aware of that everybody goes through struggles. We're human. That's all part of it. We weren't promised a perfect life, you know? And so you're going to go through hardships and you're going to go through those things. And I would much rather have people reach out to me, because I struggled with that. I struggled for, you know, I'm in the same spot for 6 years. I'm going through the same thing. I struggled with suicidal thoughts and tendencies. I struggled with severe depression. I struggled with isolation because I didn't want to be a burden to somebody else. I didn't want to dump all this heavy stuff that I was going through on other people. And so I isolated myself away. And that's the worst thing you can do. You need community in your life. You need that fellowship. You need other people. And so I see, you know, especially when we're going through this pandemic that we are with COVID and we're told to isolate away, that could be a matter of life and death for someone who's going through PTSD or going through some hardship, because you need people, you need to be able to say, look, this is what I'm dealing with. And when I finally found that voice, and when I finally started to open up to other people and say, look, I'm struggling. Everybody thought that I was this huge badass, that, oh my gosh, Gina, you can't kill her. I mean, she's immortal. She's gone through all of this stuff, and they thought that I was this tough girl. And granted, it looked like that from the outside, but on the inside, I was dying. And I couldn't share that with anybody because I didn't want to be a burden. And so if anything, it's taught me that when you finally find that voice and you open up to somebody and you say, look, I'm struggling, they open up to you and say, look, I'm going through the same thing. And these are things that we don't automatically assume. And most people are like me. They don't want to be a burden to somebody else. But until you open up and say, look, I'm struggling, I'm going through a really hard time, other people won't open up to you as well. And you figure out that everybody is going through some shit. It's not just you. Everybody's feeling those same things. Everybody has traumatic experiences that they're trying to survive with. And so unless we start to really kind of normalize mental health and the fact that we see stuff that normal people aren't supposed to see. We go through things. We sign up for a job that normal people don't get to see the ugliness of what other people can do to each other. And when we take that on, we sign up for a job that most people aren't aware of. And so we need to find an outlet to be able to express those things and say, look, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? And so if anything, I hope that as we continue to kind of open up and desensitize mental health a little bit, that it's something that is no longer a stigma, that it's okay to be like, look, I'm struggling. I think about suicide sometimes. I think about these things that are taboo to talk about. But with as many veterans as we're losing daily, as many people are committing suicide because of this pandemic, because of hopelessness, it's something that we need to address, and it's something that we need to talk about more. And there's a lot more to it that I obviously didn't share with you, but there's a lot of other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
What are some, like, in case if we ever wanted to do a second?
Like, so the University of Utah Hospital, 2 years before I'd crashed, they had hired a new engineer, and she had gone to them. And the first thing she said was, we need to have a helo pad that can house 2 full-size military aircraft. And they kept telling her, no, we don't have the funds for it. We just don't have the money. So she went out and found a private investor that gave her $1 million grant to build a new helo pad on top of the hospital that could withstand 2 full-size military helicopters. And it was a year to the day that I crashed that they had built it. So if I had crashed a year prior, we wouldn't have been able to land. They would have sent us to a different hospital because we wouldn't have been able to offload me there. A year to the day it had been built. So even just in the years prior to my accident, things were kind of in the works.
That's cool.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
The woman came to me when I finally was kind of out of the coma and was seeing visitors, and she told me her whole story. Tears were like streaming down her eyes, and she was just like, you made my whole career, because this whole hospital told me that I was ridiculous, that I was stupid, that I had no idea that I was talking about, that money would have been so well spent. And so it was really cool to hear her story and how that kind of took place a year to the day. They kind of cut the ribbon on it on March 3rd of 2009. And the fact that I crashed March 3rd, 2010, and it was like, her first full-size military aircraft would not have been able to land on that hospital had I.
Oh, because you guys were the first one to land?
Yep. We were the first ones to ever use it. Besides their little, small care flight helicopters. Yeah. And so I just thought that was really cool stuff.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Gina Panuzzi, thanks so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.